Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a fun one and it's going to round out this year of woodworking projects for me. So I've seen this video circulating around YouTube of rating your projects. So there's two things I want to disclaim. The first being we as in my boyfriend and I started woodworking in May of 2021. So we're like 4 months shy of a full year, but I think within the year, the 8 months remaining that we woodworked, we had a good gauge of a lot of projects, so enough to create a video documenting our progress on them. Second disclaimer is that none of this would have been possible without my boyfriend's knowledge or without my boyfriend's keenness to learn. A lot of the time, I admittedly will say that I was more of the inspiration or the vision behind a lot of these projects, and then he actually made it into action. So my least favorite woodworking project is quite ironic, and it's my cutting board. So cutting boards are typically some woodworking novices' first project that they do to really get their hands wet in terms of trying to use power tools, so that being a table saw, a orbital sander. But for my case, I think my boyfriend and I started out a little bit too ambitious. We should have just tried making a edge grain cutting board, but instead we tried doing an end grain cutting board. For various reasons, end grain cutting board is typically better for when you cook a lot, when your knife is hitting the board very often. It's less susceptible to splitting. So typically there is an edge grain cutting board and an end grain cutting board. The edge grain is along the plank of the wood versus the end grain is, as obvious reasons, it's the end of the planks of wood. So in order to make an end grain cutting board, it is not enough to just glue planks of wood side by side and then call it a day. What you really have to do is glue the wood pieces side by side, then cut them all vertically, and then flip them all. So after you flip it 90 degrees, then you're gonna cut each of those rectangular totem pole sections and glue those together, and then that will give you an end grain cutting board. A couple things that went wrong first is we got our wood from Home Depot. Not like Home Depot, every Home Depot has bad quality wood, but we got the planks that were 1 inch by 1 inch, and that is very susceptible to warping just because the wood is so thin. And with that said, we found that the wood from Home Depot was already warped, but we kind of made compromises and tried working around that. Due to the wood being so warped, we had to shave off a lot of the wood planks in order to compensate and make them straight. So a cutting board that, let's say, was intended to be 20 inches long ended up being more like 12. I think I was getting too idealistic with the look and aesthetic of it, and I thought less of the function of it. So what that meant is I asked for a cutting board that was pretty much 2 inches thick. I mean, if it's meant to be a butcher block and it's meant to just stay in one place, that's totally fine. But for my case, I was trying to move it around a lot, pack it away, maybe serve food on it, use it as a charcuterie board. So carrying food on top of an already heavy cutting board was just not idealistic. So with those two things combined, just having wood that wasn't in best condition to start with, and then also not being realistic about how the function of the cutting board would work, both put this at the last place. With that said though, we did have a redeeming cutting board that my boyfriend ended up making for his parents. So with that, we learned from our mistakes. We bought wood from a lumber yard, so the wood was a lot more good quality. My next ranking of my woodworking project has to go to my indoor planters. And I will say that this one wasn't necessarily a full start to finish woodworking project. It was more of an upcycled project. So originally what we were working with was these small IKEA chairs that are meant for like kids to sit on. So essentially what we did is we disassembled the two IKEA chairs. So we disassembled both of them and then created 2 planter stands out of these projects. So the reason why I don't think I would rate this higher, the reason why I didn't is because it wasn't done, like I said, from start to finish. So we didn't go source the wood, we didn't cut the wood. If anything, we just had to use a screwdriver to unscrew and then just put it back together. What I will say is that this project revealed the power of finishing and wood staining. Prior to us breaking apart these IKEA chairs, they were just this like almost white, like a pine color wood, but then with a wood stain, I was able to get them into more of a deep mahogany color. So that was a cool discovery that if you wanted to go down the cheaper route, but you still wanted that high-end look, you could always do a stain. So another reason why I'm docking some points off of this woodworking project is because we could have been a little bit more clean with how we screwed things in. We could have first created a pocket into the area that we wanted to screw in and then hid in the screw, but at that point I think it was kind of more of a playful experimentation. That project lends way into the next favorite project. So this one was a plant shelf extender. The reason why I rated this one pretty high is because, for one, it solved an issue. So I think the beauty of woodworking down to its core is that if you want something to be fixed, if you want something to be optimized, you can do it with woodworking. And that goes to say with a lot of things, not just woodworking, but anything that is very handy. Woodworking, for our case, solved that problem. So I am a big plant lover and I love putting plants on my windowsill, but I recognize that my windowsill is just like an inch shy of holding and housing all of my plants. By putting my plants on the windowsill, there was like 1 inch seam allowance of the possibility of it toppling over and just cracking, and that would be disastrous. The simple solution, the simplest of solutions, and you guys will also recognize that as I am talking through my woodworking projects, I tend to rate the ones that were cheaper or more economical or more resourceful higher, because woodworking is inherently a very expensive hobby, and not to mention we started woodworking during the peak of the pandemic. That said, wood was at sky-high prices, so yeah, a lot of the times when I'm rating my woodworking projects, a lot of it also had to come down to how affordable it was. So this project was extremely affordable. It was probably the most affordable project. So in order to create this shelf extender, we basically took a long plank of wood, and we didn't even have to buy it because my parents had an extra bed plank, the ones that you use as a structure to put your mattress on. So they switched out their bed, so we were left with all these like 1/2 inch by 8 feet long planks of wood. So what I did is I stained the wood, as I learned from the indoor planter stands that it creates more of a luxe look. So I stained that plank of wood and then cut it to size to fit the length of my windowsill. And then I got these L brackets from Home Depot. I kid you not, these L brackets are like 75 cents each. So I got 4 of them, and with that I drilled it into the wall, and now it beautifully houses all my plants. And so every time I use the restroom in the morning, I am very, very happy. Immediately I have a kick of happiness because I love looking at plants. Speaking of cheap, affordable, and resourceful, I got a little bit creative during this quarantine, and as I was trying to source wood, I was not trying to spend any more money than I needed to sourcing wood, especially if it was a more low-key project. So it was around this time in our woodworking journey that wood was getting really expensive, and to us it was just not worth it to go spend a lot of money on a project that we still were in the experimental phase. So I took to Facebook Marketplace. There was a warehouse that just had loads, just had planks of wood. I was just sitting outside of their warehouse for I don't know how long, maybe like a couple months, 6 months to a year. So I will say the wood was pretty beat up. It was in pretty poor condition, but with that we were able to get probably 6 planks of 4x4s, and that were probably around like 6 feet long. That in and of itself could have already cost couple $100s if I went to Home Depot to buy that wood. And this, like the shelf extender project, was there to address an issue. So we do all of our woodworking in the backyard, but all of our tools are housed in the garage. And although it might seem like a first world problem, from the garage to then all the way to the backyard is quite a long walk just to go back for a screwdriver, to go back for a clamp, to go back for wood glue. And so we were getting a little aggravated having to do so much walking back and forth while we were doing projects in the backyard. So with that, we thought a patio box would be the perfect tool in order for us to make woodworking a lot more efficient and to house all of our woodworking stuff. We created this patio box out of all these 4x4s that we got off of Facebook Marketplace, and As much as I love this project because of the function, it was definitely not the most time efficient or smartest thing to do because we used wood, like I said, that was laying out for 6 months to a year. So with that came a lot of, there was like sap on it, it was just sun damage, some of them was warped. So we found that when we were milling this wood, it was a lot of work. For one, we had to take out all the nails part of the planks, and then we had to shave off all of the sap, or sometimes you would even go hit the middle of the 4x4 and you'd find something weird or something smelly. The milling of the wood itself probably took us like a day and a half to do. And not to only mention that, we had to make slats of these woods basically. So every 4x4 we created probably like 4 slats out of it. So with each face of the wall, we probably used maybe like 2 planks of wood. So at the end of the day, we had all this wood, these 4x4s of wood, and it all turned out that we didn't have any excess wood left. That all that wood was used for a single patio box. So although it was cool to say that this project was completely free, $0 put into it, a lot of time was put into it. I think in total we spent like 2.5 days working on this project. But it is one of our most used projects, so with that, I think it's worth it. And that's another reason why I rated it so high. Nearing the end of this ranking video, my next most favorite project is actually the most recent woodworking project that we've done, and that is actually this picture frame up here. So I wanted a picture frame that is like had almost a 3D effect, and this is definitely taken from inspiration off of Etsy. I was in need of a picture frame. I do a lot of puzzle making, so I always want to frame up my puzzles, but as you guys know, or may not know, frames, especially custom frames that aren't standard dimensions, are crazy expensive. So the size I was looking for, I would say was around like 20 inches by maybe 2 feet, 20 by 24 inches. On Etsy, it could easily go up to $200, $300 if you're using hardwood. So instead, ding dong, asked my boyfriend, and he did some research and was able to figure out how to make this project. And what we ended up doing to make it super affordable is we ended up using pine. And for these instances, I think using a softwood is actually okay than using a hardwood. Not a lot of weight is going to be on it, and mostly it's just for aesthetic purposes if you wanted the hardwood look. But I think, although this is pine right here, I think this could easily look like maple if you didn't touch it. Yeah, the cool thing with this is we just got 2 slats of pine wood from, I think it was like Lowe's or Home Depot, and each of them were like $5. So in total for wood, we spent $10. And then I went to Goodwill and found a really cheap frame that was like $7. And I just took the acrylic from it, because if you were to go to buy acrylic from Lowe's or Home Depot for a piece that's like longer than 2 feet even, it'd probably cost you like $30 to $40. So I thought just to go the cheaper route and more resourceful route and just go to the thrift store. So I ended up finding this massive frame and took the acrylic from it and actually cut it in half with an X-Acto knife. And so with those 2 pieces of acrylic, I was able to cover 2 puzzles. So this is definitely one of my favorites because it is not only really beautiful to look at, but it was, once again, solving an issue where I was not willing to forego $200, $250 to spend on a puzzle frame when I could have easily made one like this one for less than $10. Alrighty, so rounding out my favorite woodworking project ever, and still to this day it's my favorite, is the outdoor dining set. So funnily enough, this project was actually the very first project that I've done. I created a whole video documenting it, so I'll link it somewhere over here. But basically the source of this inspiration came from us going to a brewery. So while I was at the brewery, I could not stop looking at this table, and then I talked to a waitress about the table, whether it was made in-house or they purchased it from elsewhere. And the waitress actually told me that all of the wood found in the brewery was all made by the owner. So that kind of blew my mind a little bit, just thinking that a project to the scale of like 8 feet could be done just yourself. And so I think that really also sparked my creative journey. While some people make cutting boards, we make an 8-foot long patio table. But at the root of it, the design of it was super simple. It didn't require too many power tools. At the time, we didn't even own a table saw, so we actually rented a circular saw from Home Depot. I don't recommend using a circular saw to cut through 4x4s just because some of those circular saws do not cut deeper than like 2 to 3 inches, so cutting through a 4x4 was quite dangerous with a circular saw. But that point aside, this has had to be my favorite. Not only has it worn in really well, so what I mean by that is when we first got the wood, because it was treated wood, it was a super red, deep color, but I wasn't actually a huge fan of that. But as it's been out weathering the conditions, it has set into this really beautiful, almost like amber color. So that has been something that was unexpectedly my favorite. Just the look of the color, how it has worn over for a year, but also just how many gatherings happen around this table. So the reason and inspiration behind why I wanted this table was because when we're in the peak of COVID in 2020 and we're all locked in and stuck at home, I was trying to find a way for me and my family to experience something like a change, so not always just eating at our kitchen table, but bringing some dinners outside to eat in our backyard. But at the time, we didn't have a functional space. So I ended up clearing out the backyard space for this 8-foot long table to live at, and it ended up being probably the most used item of woodworking that I've done. Simply because this table allows for me to host easier. So I can host events that are like 10 to 12 to 14 people. It's definitely where I do a lot of my gardening as well. When I'm repotting plants or potting plants, I use that table to its full advantage. So all to say is this table has been a huge, huge success. To accompany that table, we also made benches. So I'm grouping these two favorites into one ranking. So we also made benches, and this time with the benches we used redwood. So like I said, with the patio table we used pre-treated wood. So usually treated wood just basically means that it can withstand more of the weather conditions like rain, heat, but using hardwood, you still need to finish it. So when we initially got the redwood, it was this beautiful, beautiful red, deep red color, but as it's gotten sun damage, it evidently has worn off and faded a bit. But all to say, these two in tandem are still one of my favorite projects, or if not the favorite project, because like I said, we were able to solve an issue, and now it's so fun hosting in my backyard. We host probably like once every 2 months because we love having people over and just experiencing the outdoor space. So that rounds out my video. You guys tell me in the comments what you guys think is your favorite project. I'm biased, and I think the table is definitely going to be my favorite, if not my all-time favorite out of all projects that I do now and continue to do. And I hope at the end of the day, the projects that I shared about and kind of the little tips that I shared has inspired you to possibly do a project of your own. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye!